The night felt different from the start. I should have known better. But I didn't. I was grounded. Again. The rule in our house was simple. Never leave after 10 p.m. on December 15th. My parents had always insisted it was for my own safety. They never gave me any real reason. They just repeated it, year after year, with growing urgency as the night neared. And as always, I obeyed. Until tonight. "You coming? 10:13, right?" The message buzzed on my phone. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was my friend Emily. "I'm grounded. They won't let me leave." I said, "Trust me, 10:13. Be outside. You'll regret it if you don't." Emily insisted. The air in my room felt thick and suffocating. I stared at the clock on my wall. 9:45 p.m. I had only a few minutes. I couldn't let Emily down. Not now. I waited until I heard the rhythmic breathing of my parents, the soft rise and fall that meant they were asleep. Quietly, I snuck out the back door and into the night. The air hit me like a slap, cold, biting. But it wasn't just the cold that made my skin crawl. The silence in the streets was oppressive. There were no crickets, no cars, not even the usual hum of distant televisions. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the emptiness. As I reached the corner, I looked at the houses around me. Every window was dark. The streetlights flickered, casting long, haunting shadows that seemed to stretch out toward me like fingers. A deep sense of wrongness settled over me, but I brushed it off. Emily would be waiting. I had to see her. When I finally arrived at her house, the porch light was off, and the front windows were black. It was like the house was abandoned, though I knew it wasn't. I stood in the driveway for a moment. "I'm here, where are you?" No reply. Confused, I stepped closer to the window, trying to peer inside. That's when it happened. A stone, small but sharp, hit my foot. I jerked back, heart slamming into my chest. I looked down. Nothing. The street was deserted. Suddenly, a hum filled the air. A low, vibrating noise, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. It was as though the earth itself was alive, shaking beneath my feet. My breath hitched, and I froze, looking around. Nothing moved. I turned back to the window, and that's when I saw it. Emily's face pressed against the glass. Her eyes were wide, frantic. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. She looked like she was trying to scream, her expression full of terror. Something in her gaze locked with mine, and my blood ran cold. This wasn't the Emily I knew. The hum intensified. It vibrated through my bones. I felt like it was coming from inside the house itself. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the world snapped back into focus. I had to leave. I had to run. I turned and bolted down the street, my legs moving faster than I ever thought they could, but it wasn't enough. I could hear something following me, just out of sight. My breath came in gasps, the hum still buzzing, vibrating in my skull. It was like it was all around me, closing in. I didn't stop running until I reached the park. My chest burned, my legs shaking beneath me as I huddled behind a tree. The cold biting into my skin. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. But something was wrong. The night was too quiet now. And I heard it again. The hum. Faint at first, then louder, as if it were moving closer. I stayed hidden in the park, my body trembling, and my heart racing. I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have disobeyed. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, but it didn't bring relief. Every creak of the branches felt like footsteps. Every rustle of leaves felt like someone, or something, was getting closer. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse, like the earth itself was alive, resonating with that hum. I didn't know where it was coming from, but it was everywhere now. Above me, below me, in my ears, in my chest. And then, it happened again. A stone hit me, hard, right on the back of my neck. I yelped and spun around. Nothing. My breath quickened. I was being watched. But by who or what? I pulled my phone from my pocket and texted Emily. "What's happening? Where are you?" No reply. I looked around frantically, eyes darting between the trees. The world felt wrong. It felt like I was in a dream, a nightmare. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. I was starting to panic. And that's when I saw it. A shadow moved between the trees. No, it wasn't just a shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its limbs bent at odd angles, too long, too thin. The air seemed to ripple around it, distorting the light and making it hard to focus on. It moved slowly, gliding, almost like it was floating. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The creature's face was a nightmare. No eyes, just empty, hollow sockets. Its mouth was wide open, stretching impossibly wide, with jagged, sharp teeth glistening in the pale moonlight. It was staring right at me. I stumbled backward, my feet catching on the ground as I scrambled to get up. My heart pounded harder than ever, but my legs were stiff, frozen. I had to move. I had to get away. I turned and ran, faster than I thought possible, the hum growing louder, pulsing in my skull. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could hear was the sound of my feet pounding the ground and the hum that was now deafening. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred from the tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop until I was back at my house. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it, bolting it, pressing my back against it. My parents came rushing out of their bedroom, wild-eyed and frantic. My dad grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip firm. "You went outside, didn't you?" he demanded, his voice low and trembling. "I didn't think it was real, I started, but stopped as a sharp itch flared on the side of my neck. I instinctively reached up to scratch it. "What's wrong?" my mom asked, her gaze darting nervously between me and my dad. "It's nothing," I muttered, but my dad's eyes narrowed. "Let me see," he said. Reluctantly, I moved my hand away. He leaned closer, his expression turning grim. His voice dropped to a whisper, thick with dread. "You've marked us." My stomach dropped. Marked us? What did that even mean? Before I could ask, they started moving, shouting over each other as they pulled furniture across the room, dragging the couch, flipping the table, and stacking chairs against the doors and windows. I just stood there, frozen, as they worked. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sounding so small like it wasn't even mine. They wouldn't explain further, only barricaded the doors and windows. That night I hardly slept, every creak and groan of the house making my heart race. The silence outside was deafening, as though the world itself had been sucked into some horrible void. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my eyes darted nervously to the shadows that seemed to move on their own. By morning, I thought the nightmare was over, until I found the first sign. It was a deep, jagged scratch mark running the length of our front door. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. Too precise, too purposeful. It wasn't the sort of thing that could happen by accident. My fingers traced the edge of the mark, my stomach turning with the growing realization that whatever had followed me that night wasn't done with us. The days that followed blurred into one long, suffocating haze of paranoia. Every night, the hum returned. First faint, then louder, circling our house like the breath of a predator stalking its prey. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, sometimes above, sometimes below, always surrounding us. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, a constant hum in the back of my mind that wouldn't go away. We couldn't leave. The thing wouldn't let us. And with every passing hour, it felt like the walls were closing in tighter. My parents tried to keep me calm, but I could see it in their eyes. Fear. It was the same fear I saw in the mirror when I dared to look at myself. The The same fear that kept me from falling asleep at night, eyes wide and heart hammering. They'd lock all the doors, check all the windows, and then retreat to the darkest corner of the house, sitting in silence as if waiting for something to happen. Waiting for it. On the fifth night, the power went out. It was as if the world had gone blind. The house fell into absolute darkness, and for a moment, I thought I could hear my own heartbeat in the stillness. The hum, once distant, now filled the air, unbearably close, vibrating through the walls, shaking the floorboards beneath us. My skin prickled. I could feel the air thickening with something unseen, something wrong. My dad stopped long enough to look at me, his face grim. "You shouldn't have gone outside." The weight of his words settled over me like a lead blanket. I sat down on the couch as they kept working, the sound of nails being hammered into the window frames echoing through the house. My parents tried to keep me calm, but I could see it in their eyes. Fear. It was the same fear I saw in the mirror when I dared to look at myself, the same fear that kept me from falling asleep at night, eyes wide and heart hammering. They'd lock all the doors, check all the windows, and then retreat to the darkest corner of the house, sitting in silence as if waiting for something to happen. Waiting for it. On the fifth night, the power went out. It was as if the world had gone blind. The house fell into absolute darkness, and for a moment, I thought I could hear my own heartbeat in the stillness. The hum, once distant, now filled the air, unbearably close, vibrating through the walls, shaking the floorboards beneath us. My skin prickled. I could feel the air thickening with something unseen, something wrong. My dad stopped long enough to look at me, his face grim. "You shouldn't have gone outside." The weight of his words settled over me like a lead blanket. I sat down on the couch as they kept working, the sound of nails being hammered into the window frames echoing through the house. And then came the knocking. It wasn't frantic or random, it was slow, methodical, like it had all the time in the world. First on the front door, then the back, then the windows. Knock, knock, knock. It didn't stop. It moved around the house, hitting every surface. Walls, windows, even the roof. I sat there, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it would end, that it couldn't get in, that we were safe. But then the whispers started. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside the house. Low, guttural voices overlapping each other, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I looked at my parents, but they were staring at the floor, their faces pale. They weren't even trying to stop it. They just sat there, frozen, like they knew something I didn't. The whispers grew louder, more insistent until they drowned out everything else. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts. And then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the house. My dad jumped up, swinging the poker wildly, but there was nothing there. "It's inside," he whispered. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. I could feel it now, whatever it was, standing just behind me. I didn't dare turn around. And then the lights went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, everything was still. Silent. I could hear my own breathing, shaky and shallow. And then it spoke. I don't know how to describe it. The voice wasn't human. It was too deep, too layered, like 100 people speaking at once. It said my name. I froze. My parents didn't react. They just sat there, staring at the dark, their faces blank. And then it said something else. "Why did you leave?" The voice was inside my head, twisting through my thoughts, filling every corner of my mind. I tried to block it out, but it was everywhere, suffocating me. And then the hum came back, louder than ever, shaking the house, rattling the walls. The whispers turned into screams, high-pitched and piercing, as the knocking turned into pounding. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. My mom screamed. My dad swinging the poker at something I couldn't see. Shadows moving in the dark, their shapes shifting and unnatural. And then, nothing. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. My parents were gone. The police said there had been a break-in, but I knew the truth. They won't find them. They won't find anything. It's December 15th again tonight. I'm sitting here in a motel far away from home. The door's locked. The window's boarded. But the hum has already started. It's louder this time. And I know it's coming for me.